afternoon, good afternoon. Hello. You too. Yoo-hoo. Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for coming out on this beautiful afternoon. My name's Jane MacDonald, along with my friend Norlin Vevers and Alice Menaker. Where's Alice? Yes, there's Alice. Thank you. How's that, Alice? Is that better? Yes. Great. Thank you for that. Welcome. So, you've met Alice. Norlin Vevers and myself were the co-organizers of DimeStories. This will be our 6th event, 2nd year, and our concluding event for this year. Thank you so much for coming and listening to stories here in the county. Before we begin, I wanted to note that as Canadians, we've begun a new practice which we call land acknowledgements. And in my books, that's to remind us of our relatedness to the land and with First Nations. My sense is that when we make a land acknowledgement, we can take that as an opportunity to remember there's much work to do and many broken promises. We're invited to consider in our hearts and minds what we can do to mend them. But it's also an opportunity to think about the great promise available to all of us together, despite everything, here on this land we call Prince Edward County, Canada, this land. Whether we admit it or not, we who live on this land are treaty people in relationship with First Nations. The Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee came before us here in Prince Edward County. They are still here, despite everything. We honor them. We acknowledge we live on this land with truth and humility, with courage and honesty. We acknowledge we are treaty people. So, I'd like to welcome all of our readers. Please come in. Don't be shy, my friend. Thank you. Thank you for coming. We have all of our readers will be introduced. Come on in, you guys. Welcome, welcome. Thank you. All of our readers will be introduced by name. We want to leave the airwaves open for stories, so there's not a lot of folderol about where they're from or their considerable accomplishments. So we do turn your attention to the program on your seat, where you will hear all about, some of them even have websites. Some of our writers have provided websites if you'd like to contact them or learn more about them. DimeStories is about story, so each of our writers will read for about 5 minutes, and then another writer will come up. We do have open mic. It looks like all of the slots are signed up, so I'll be inviting you up by name. Our first open mic reader will be coming, shuffle papers, shuffle, shuffle. I think the 4th reader, and I will invite you up by name, so that'll be you, Stacey. Oh, right. Before we begin, please check that you've turned off your cell phones. And along with Norlin and Alice, we'd like to thank Books and Company from Picton for their continued support of DimeStories. They have a book table just inside the room there. For many of our writers have books available for sale. Please buy books. Your $20 or $30 or $40 go a long way to keeping the lights on and to keeping our writers writing. Writers need readers, readers need books. Please buy books. And finally, we would like to thank Prince Edward County's marvelous library, Barbara Sweet and Ella Hook, who have done so much to make us welcome, and of course Adam Kavanaugh, the IT specialist here at Prince Edward County's Picton Library, has been indispensable and our #1 supporter, and we thank you so much, Adam, for your continued help to us. He's responsible for recording this event, so there is a video camera trained on the writers, and we will be releasing that video. Well, Picton Library will have it on their YouTube channel. All right, so now it is time to sit back, relax, and enjoy some beautiful stories. And I'd like to invite our first writer, Fiona Patton. Fiona.
Hello, this is a section from Signs Are Hazy, Ask Again Later, the same story I read last time, from Little Red Riding Hood in the Big Bad City. I just want to mention that quite a number of the things in this story are real. So, Lucky suddenly stopped dead. George tugged gently on his leash, but the tiny dog simply sat down and fixed him with a big, round-eyed stare. George sighed. "You can't possibly be cold yet," he admonished. Lucky continued to stare. "Oh, very well." As George bent to pick him up, he came face to face with a green plastic dog-shaped plant sitting in a golden pot. As he straightened, Lucky under one arm, he saw it was actually a Chihuahua topiary, great green ears stretching almost 3 feet wide. Lucky immediately began to bark at it. "Hush," George said absently as he glanced up. "The Laughing Chihuahua Knick-Knack Shop. I bet we'll find something very unusual in here, and if not, you could always use a new coat." Laying a finger on Lucky's nose to quiet him, he headed inside. The Laughing Chihuahua Knick-Knack Shop was warm and bright and smelled of dog biscuits. The tiny puppy-shaped bell atop the door tinkled musically as he entered, and he stopped just inside and gawked. The front showroom was crammed to the rafters with Chihuahua-themed objects of every size, shape, and description, from the usual pint-sized dog beds, sweaters, chew toys, and bathing products, to Chihuahua-shaped teapots, cream and sugar sets, and salt and pepper shakers. Dog-decorated flags, tapestries, and wind chimes hung from the ceiling, while racks of Chihuahua-embroidered sweatshirts, t-shirts, hats, socks, ties, and scarves marched down the center of the room. One wall was dedicated to a very familiar brown deer-type Chihuahua, whose face was plastered on everything from mugs to buttons to mouse pads to stationery, and the other was made up of a special holiday display, carrying dog-festooned Christmas stockings, ornaments, and lights, besides Chihuahua figurines dressed as pilgrims, bats, and leprechauns, set in front of a collection of stuffed dogs wearing hearts, maple leaves, and Easter eggs on tiny little knitted sweaters. What space was left on the walls was covered in Chihuahua photographs, plaques, paintings, and drawings, beside a wide shelf of what were probably Chihuahua-themed books and videos. The woman who came around the glass-top counter was equally decked out in a bright blue sweatshirt emblazed with a white Chihuahua in a jester's hat. She smiled widely when she caught sight of Lucky, tucked in the crook of George's right arm, one leather-booted paw braced against his shoulder. "And who is this little darling?" she asked. Lucky, that is, Lucky Charm," George replied, suddenly inexplicably shy. "Well, aren't you adorable?" She tickled Lucky under the chin. "Is he an only Chi?" "Do you have more than one dog?" she explained. "Many Chi owners have multiples." Yes, there's just him." "Well now," she turned her head. Ashley, come here, girl. My little one is an only Chi too. Why don't you set him down just there?" George couldn't help but raise Lucky a little higher. "Yes, well, I'm not so sure that's a good idea. I mean, Lucky hasn't met that many other dogs." "Oh, don't you worry about that. Chis are very clannish." "Ah, there you are, sweetie. See, he does want to meet her." Lucky had begun to wiggle frantically in George's arms as a small reddish female Chihuahua came out from around the counter. And rather than risk having him leap to the floor and break a leg, George set him carefully down on the carpet. Ashley immediately began to sniff his muzzle and ears very aggressively, while Lucky stood stock still, shivering with pleasure. "I told you," the woman beamed. "I'm Wanda, by the way," she said, sticking her hand out. George. Hello, George. Always nice to meet another Chi parent. Were you looking for anything in particular today?" "No, yes, sort of." He explained about the scavenger hunt, and Wanda nodded sagely. "Well, you've come to the right place, I'd say. Let's see what we can find, shall we?" "Oh, don't worry about them. They'll be fine." She led him around the store, offering various items for his consideration, as Lucky continued to suffer Ashley's thorough inspection with a beatific look on his face. George considered and discarded a Chihuahua-shaped cookie jar, wine bottle, and a bumper sticker that read, "My Chihuahua is smarter than your honor student," before pausing at the New Age section. Wedged beneath the deck of Chihuahua tarot cards and a book entitled Discovering Your Chi's Chi was what seemed to be a kind of Aladdin's lamp. On closer inspection, he saw that it was etched with several of the distinctive little dogs wearing turbans and sitting on tiny flying carpets. What's this, he asked. Oh, that's a lamp, Wanda answered. Don't rub it. George smiled a little subconsciously. Why, will a little cheese-shaped genie pop out? Wanda gave him a non-committal shrug. Could be, she said, with a serious expression. Taking it out of his hand, she very carefully set it back on the shelf. Besides, it's $6.99. I thought you said your item needed to be under $5. Oh, yes, I did. George turned away from the lamp with an expression of real reluctance before picking up a somewhat more prosaic-looking object. What's this? Ah, now that's really unusual, Wanda said with a smile. And it's only $3.99. So you bought a plastic dog figurine? Hunched over a large black coffee in the Sleepless Goat Cafe, Fred eyed George's purchase with disdain. No, I bought a fortune-telling plastic chihuahua figurine, George retorted, moving his mocha latte out of Lucky's reach before fixing his cousin with a reproachful stare. You ask it a question, and then you turn it over and read the answer. Brandon nearly choked on his own drink. You bought a plastic dog figurine that tells the future through its butt? Oh yeah, that'll win for sure, Fred scoffed. Just try it. Ask it a question. Okay, fine. The younger man snatched up the figurine. Is this going to be the lamest item in the scavenger hunt, or what? He demanded. Turning it upside down, his eyes narrowed, then he grinned. Brandon and George leaned forward. Well, it says no way. He turned it right side up again. Okay, is it going to win the scavenger hunt? He checked the bottom again and chuckled. Chances are. Right, I'm sold. It's kind of like a magical doggy 8-ball. There, you see? The other Laughing Chihuahua knick-knack shop. So, cheers.
Well, thank you, Fiona. Next, I'd like to welcome Janet Davies, who's going to tell us a story.
Oh, I better have my water just in case. Okay, I've never written this one down, but I thought it might amuse you. When I was 16, I lived for a year in Ethiopia. And yes, it came as a surprise to me too. My father was a construction engineer, project manager, and he'd worked all over the world. When he was in Luxembourg and Germany and France, I used to think, oh, I'd love to be there. He was in England when the Beatles started. But I'm one of 6 children, and it just wasn't feasible for my mother to take us all wherever my father was working. But by 1967, there were only 4 of us at home, and I was the oldest, and they decided we would go to the next place my dad was going to work. And I distinctly remember the phone call. I lived in Willowdale, North York, and there was a wall phone in the kitchen with a great big long cord. My father was calling from the bush in northern Quebec, where he was working at the time. And he said, Midge, which is what he called her because she was very, very short and he was very, very tall. Midge, we're going to Ethiopia. Now, this was 1967. It was before the famine. It was before Band-Aid. My mother covered the mouthpiece and went, Janet, go get the atlas. And I went and got the big book, and I opened it up. And there it was, top right-hand corner of Africa, Ethiopia. So we moved there, and for the first couple of months, they took me out of school. They took me out of school for the year, and there was briefly talk about sending me to a boarding school in Europe. And I was, please, I would have loved that, but of course it didn't happen. The only one who went to school was my 10-year-old brother. And he went to an American religious boarding school, which was not the best life choice for him, as it turned out, but that's another story. We went to Ethiopia for the first couple of months. We lived in Addis Ababa, which is the capital, and we were on the outskirts, a little bungalow, big high fences, big gate man. And absolutely nothing happened. There was nothing for me to do. I wasn't in school. There was no TV, no internet. I did a lot of reading, played my records, and then one day, something did happen. There was a fair in Addis Ababa, I think mainly for the expats, and my father took me, and I was so excited. I got my little 1967 tent dress on, and off we went to the fair, and we ran into some English men, young men who were working in Addis, and one of them took a shine to me. And my father was very accommodating. He was like, please, yes, take my daughter. Off on a date. Go on, have some fun. Off you go. And I was 16, and this fella had to be 25. And he was a big fella, kind of soft and big horn-rimmed glasses, kind of nerdy, really. But I was so excited. I'm doing something, and he's English. Here we go. And I don't remember what we did, but I do remember we got in a car accident because he was driving and staring at me adoringly and ran straight into a parked car. Oh. So we had to go to an Ethiopian police station, and it was getting to be dusk. And I presume because of his diplomatic status, nothing much happened. But we went back to his house because somehow in the accident I had ripped my dress. And we thought it best to mend my dress before he took me home. And so we were at John's house, and Dionne Warwick was on the turntable, and I believe I had a glass of sherry. I didn't drink, but I had this glass of sherry. And John disappeared to get into something more comfortable. And when he reappeared, he was wearing a black turtleneck and pajama pants, and he had his thingy in his hand. And I screamed because I'm 16, I'm sheltered life, I'd never seen one before. And so he very quickly tucked it away again. And I'm pretty sure we wrapped up quickly after that. And he took me home. And we drew up to the little house with the great big fence and the gates and the gate man. And I'm sure the gate man told my father that the young lady was home. So as we approached the house, I could see my dad standing outside the little house, backlit from the open door, in his underpants. And he had a huge hunting knife around his waist on a leather belt, standing there with his arms crossed. And of course, John must have nearly had a heart attack. I did not, because of course I know my father. But he got out of the car, came round, shuffled me over. Here he is, sir. Here he is, sir. And my father was very gracious about the whole thing. Just put his arm around me, standing there in his pants. And nothing was said about the incident, which, why would it be? And shortly after that, we did move off to the remote area of Wanji where my father was building the pulp and paper mill. And I believe we saw the young man again before we went. But we were in a group, and everybody kept their clothes on. And that was it.
Wow. Okay, next story will be from Dominic Leslie. Please, Dominic.
I can stand bow-legged if I need to.
No. How's that? Is that good?
That works. So I'm going to read a story I actually wrote for this occasion. What's funny is this came from sort of what I thought was a funny idea. What you're going to hear is an incredibly unfunny story, which is one of those interesting things that happens when you pick up the pen and you go in with an intention and then something else begins to pour out. So this is a collision of two very famous stories, and I want to see how it lands in this room as to whether it's something I should continue to pursue. So it's called The Extravagant Executioner, and it begins with a quote. Some say that the children were led into a cave and that it came out again in Transylvania, from the tales of the brothers Grimm. The Extravagant Executioner. That is what the people used to call me. In towns and villages across Europe, they would wish for me, summon me with a single silver sovereign dropped into holy water. Always their cries for help would involve some manner of beast beyond their skill and courage to face. Fearsome wolves rumoured to have once been men, bears the size of shire horses, boars with a taste for stray children, and foxes whose cunning lured travellers into the frozen depths of the forest. So I would come, answering their summons. Each morning I would wake with the dawn, throw on my cloak of innumerable colours, tuck my weapons of choice, a small silver flute and an obsidian knife into my pocket, kiss the curls atop your sleeping head, and pass through the portal on the mountaintop to whichever lost, lonely dwelling needed me. Each night I would return a pocket full of coins and a prized tooth from whichever beast had fallen prey to the fatal combination of melody and blade. In spite of the exhaustion of the work, I'd find myself bounding down the mountainside, eager to enjoy the comforts of the hearth fire and of my wife, and spend a few joyful hours in your toddling excitement. Those were the halcyon days of my life. The days before the three of us became the two of us. When you would wrap yourself among the rippling folds of my cloak and allow yourself to be lulled to sleep at my feet. Back then you didn't know why I left the house each day. You couldn't recognize the smell of stale blood on my skin or understand how easily my music could be turned into a death march. And back then I could never have imagined what you would become, how my beloved son would transform himself into an undead creature born of nightmares. It has been years since I set foot on the mountainside. Today that is your domain, the site of your dark dominion that the people of Transylvania dare not set foot upon. But still the whispers find their way to my door. They tell me you've long since cast aside your name and like my own younger days, you've established for yourself a title. The people living in the shadow of your castle draw images of you too. The blonde hair I remember, hacked away, the blue of your eye replaced with a gleam of red, and your skin deathly pale. They say you're clad in cloth just as I was, but in place of colour you have stained those stolen robes black. Oh child, how did we get here? Me, an old man disrobed, disgraced, and abandoned to a life of memories and regrets, and you, beyond the realms of the living. I'm sure there were signs. Perhaps the trauma of your mother's death began your descent, or maybe it was the everyday loneliness that gnawed away at your sanity as you sat waiting for me to return from wherever I had been summoned. Or was it simply fate and destiny? Forces that set good and evil in motion in equal measure. These are the questions with answers beyond my grasp. What I do remember is the moment you became this monster, and I'm still haunted by the knowledge that I could have stopped it. I could have saved you, if only we'd stopped at the rats. The rats were the job. What came next? Well, that's the stuff of folklore. But the rats aren't why no one remembers me as the extravagant executioner, or why no one talks about a hero whose glittering cloak and magical flute once meant hope. Instead, to those who live in the shadow of the mountain, I'm the father of Dracula. And to the rest of the world, I'm remembered as the man who stole a town's children. I'm remembered forever as the Pied Piper.
Thank you, Dominic. And Janet, I didn't say thank you to you. Thank you for your story, too. Now we have 3 open mics and 3 open mic spots. So we've got Stacey Michner, Heather, Lindsay, and Suzanne Biro. Stacey and then Heather, you will be reading. And then later on, we'll invite up Suzanne. So Stacey, if you could come now. Thank you.
You just said I'm nervous. She said good. I have 2 very short pieces. The first one is just, I'm reading it because it delights me. It's a funny little thing when I was driving through Tennessee, and there was a house in the middle of nowhere with a big fence around it and a cow in the front yard. So that thought stayed with me, so we have this little kind of a poem called Cows. I like the idea of cows living in my front yard, their tender, loving eyes greeting all who attend my front door, soothing the shock of discovering a covert city farm. Perhaps they saunter over to the new friend and nuzzle against their hand, or even their neck, soft, nose, loofah-like whiskers, thrilling and charming the guest, because whoever experiences the warm, affectionate, bovine curiosity in the front yard of a city home. And the next one is just a little flash fiction piece that I wrote not too long ago, called The Pond. The mesh in the screen door sagged loosely in its frame, the edges torn so that it didn't really do its job as it once had. It had been like that for so long, Connie didn't even notice anymore. There was a faded blue plastic butterfly still snapped into the center of the screen, where she'd once tried to hide one of the holes and block out the mosquitoes. That was back when she cared, when she still painted her nails bright colors, dressed in happy printed pedal pushers and pop tops, waiting for Ray to come through the door and drop his battered old briefcase on the floor. He'd call her name in a voice so mellifluous her breath would catch in her throat, and she would have to steady herself against the wall for a moment. At the end of the day, she and Ray would sometimes skip their shower and race the short distance through the trees to the pond, laughing and tripping as they stripped off their clothes and dove naked into the cool water. Surfacing, she would hold him. She was a much better swimmer than Ray, having grown up by the pond in the tiny shack where they now lived. Connie remembers floating quietly as the ripples they had just created lost their urgency and were replaced by the water skimmers scuttling across the surface of the pond. The tiny flies also returned, hovering just above the water and glowing like daytime fireflies in the waning sun. These were her favorite times, quiet and dreamy, when they would make plans for their future. No kids for them. They would travel the globe seeking pyramids and polar bears, the Taj Mahal in Tangier. They would send postcards home, just so they would have stamps to remind them of their journeys. They would fly, they would trek, they would paddle. They would go wherever they wanted and always come back to their tiny shack in the forest, where they floated in the pond while the deer and rabbits watched. Connie thought about all of that as the before times, before they had even heard of a country called Vietnam, before the letter came with its government stamp and black print. You are hereby ordered to report for duty.
Thank you, Stacey. And now our next open mic reader is Heather Lindsay.
This is a poetic triptych. Oh, messy me, rumpled and wrinkled, gray-haired and flabby, chubby as a child, I return to my beginning in my 66th year. This cycle of becoming undone by undoing layers over places that used to hurt so too much to touch. Left with scars that speak of bits of fear that spilled from me like fluff on a sweater, caught in the weave of wool, all those loose threads in my life, ripped and pulled through to mend a hole in a place I longed to feel full, never knowing I was already enough. I tend a tidy garden, try to grow words, to embolden poems, to become beautiful bouquets. Yet endlessly my angst drizzles into my world. I'm often foggy, seem to forget my path through these woods. So I stay put, tend the parts of me I'm most familiar with, wear stretchy pants. As I fill my emptiness with food, a love I give myself. I used to feel uncomfortable with messy. Now I know it's a sign of activity. Things moving, shifting, life existing, all the times I've tried to fill my drive to thrive, to shape the space I inhabit, to meet the seed in me that longs to grow. I activate and agitate myself. I pluck and weed, pull and push away, try and reveal the truth in me. rather than just the messiness, the mumbled junk that lingers in the pockets of my well-worn heart, my thoughts that cling like static to my pants. I cycle and ski to be outside. I move to feel alive and right to dry tears I used to cry. Screw the plans. Sometimes my mind is not my friend. Alone in my head, I can make up a world that does not exist. Paint pictures of future scenes based on fabricated realities, often worst-case scenarios. Ideas become attempts to direct the outcome of my life because I don't trust the process. Little room left for divine intervention. What about the random stop along the way? What about the delight of the unexpected? That rushing river blossoms, frilly, ruffled, white water, begs you to pull over, sit on its banks, imagine where it's been, where it might go around the next bend. Dissolve into the flow of the moment. Let go of all the predetermined destinations. Screw the plans. Take the lid off your life. Drive with the top down. Let the unknown get behind the wheel of your desire. Invite a little nudge from above, a twinkle from the way the light lands on the lake. A glimmer turns your head. A simple notion, an inclination tilts towards something not in your plans. As soon as I took the leap, I woke to a desperate need to surrender, give myself to the drift of life, just how snow lets the wind blow its curves and mold its banks. I needed to follow my nose, sink into the sadness, swim into the dark, trust in the value of fallow time. I released the life I knew, desperate to allow myself to become what I had no idea. I needed my spirits to lift, to feel free, so I had to feel everything, even what I didn't want to feel. I've grown like a bulb in the cold soil of winter. I'm blooming at 65, alive in a way I've never been, creative and faithful to the muse. Screw the plans. Let life lead. Be guided by alchemy. Trust in the chart, my path. Trust it to chart my path. Conjure the becoming of my unfurling delight. Lasting marks. I want to leave my tits untethered as my face becomes a map to places I wish I'd never been, my unexpected destiny. I want to weep in ecstasy as I get my scars tattooed, reclaim the way pain shaped me. I want to own my wrinkles as weathered wisdom, let shampoo highlight the white and silver I earned on the way out of the boardroom, into digging in people's gardens. I want to love the extra layers of flesh my age affords me as I accept the gravity of getting older. I want to write in permanent black marker on the sidewalk morsels I've learned through experience without anyone knowing it's me. I want my words to matter the way silence sometimes can. I want to dedicate my days to find ways to speak like a razor cuts without even opening my mouth. I want to shine for younger women who see 60-something as sexy and sassy, model how to shed shyness and shame. I want my art to say everything I never could.
Thank you, Heather. And now we'd like to welcome to the podium Tanya Huff.
This needs to come with a height requirement, so you don't have to keep doing this. Excuse me while I adjust my vision. This is the beginning of a short story called Knights of the Round Table. It's Knights without the K, so just the N. And just so you know what you're getting into, I'm going to read the introduction I added in this particular collection. Growing up, everyone has heroes who are important to them. Heroes who help form the way they look at the world. Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table were not among mine, just so you know. They met outside the chamber door, the old woman and the young. Camelot slept. The night so still and quiet within its walls, they might have been the only two alive. Are you ready? The girl drew in a deep breath, eyes dark, wide, thin cheeks flushed. I'm not sure. You've no time to be unsure, the old woman snapped. We do what has to be done. What has to be done, the girl repeated, as though the words gave her courage. Lifting her basket in one claw-like hand, the old woman laid the other against the iron-bound door. Bring the torch, she said. The chamber of the round table danced with shadows. Thin bands of moonlight poured through the arrow slits and drew golden lines across polished wood, illuminated the rampant stag carved into a slab of oak, gilded pale blocks of stone. As the door closed behind them and the shadows wrapped around them both like shrouds, the old woman set her basket down in the rushes, placing a fist on each bony hip. How the blazes they expect us to clean this place in the dark, I'll never know. They got me coming in here to clean up after them once a week since they built this great pile of bugger and rock, but does any of them think to leave a torch lit? No. My cat's got more brains than the whole sodding lot of them. But Gran, it's so romantic, her grandmother snorted. You'll think it's a sight less romantic if you step on one of them morning stars left lying around. Now lights up, Manda. They ain't paying us to waste time. 6 torches lit. 7. The light began to reflect off the pale stone walls, filling the room with a soft, diffuse glow. 9. 10. Manda carefully extinguished her own small torch. Only one of the shadows, pooled in the depths of a massive chair, remained. Ah, criminy, not again. Manda clutched at her grandmother's homespun sleeve. Who is it, Gran? Sir Gareth, nephew to the king. He used to work in the kitchens with our Sarah. He what? Long story. You get busy turning them rushes now. Any big bits of stuff that ain't supposed to be there, pitch out the window. Unless it looks edible, then tuck it away for later. Gran, her cheeks were bright pink as she stared across the room at Sir Gareth. That's one of the knights. I can't be doing the cleaning in front of a knight. You can do what you're told, girl, while I goes and has a word with old mournful Morris. Nods are good, she added, shaking her arm free of Manda's grip. Won't even notice you. Servants is invisible to his sort. But you're a... Her grandmother's glare wedged the final word sideways in her throat. Won't you be invisible? She rephrased after she stopped coughing. No, he knows me. Prominent gray brows drew in and girded for battle. The old woman stomped around the table. Well, she demanded, glaring up at the fair young man in the chair, who, even sitting, was taller than she. Don't you have a home to go to? He opened a pair of brilliant blue eyes framed by long lashes. Is that you, Mother Orland? No, it's a sodding queen of the fairies. Ah, fair Titania, who doth tempt with silvered words and capricious beauty. Yeah, I hear she does windows. Spit it out. What was it this time? A raspberry flan. Uh-huh. Fain, but it came to my table with a soggy center, and yet the syrup did not touch the edge. 2 of the berries maintained still their stems, and others had been crushed beyond recognition. And the cream, well whipped as it was nigh to butter. I vow by my faith as a knight I could have made it better in my sleep. You said that? He sighed in affirmative, and my lady has banished me from her chamber. We've been through this. Grabbing the front of his tunic, she dragged his head around until she could capture his gaze with hers. Don't criticize the cooking. Your missus don't like being reminded of that year you spent in the kitchens. But 2 of the berries maintained their stems. The fingers he held up were a latticework pattern of scars. 2. Yeah, I heard you the first time. And a large fly had been cooked into the syrup. Protein. Some of us is thankful to get a fly or 2 cooked into our flans. Releasing him, Mother Orland folded her arms and stood quietly for a moment, brow creased in thought. All right, she said at last. Here's what you're going to do. Since you can't keep your mouth shut, we're going to work with what we have. You're going to go home and clank your nightly way down to the kitchens, and you're going to make that flan the way it's supposed to be made. Then you're going to take it to your missus and get down on your knees and feed it to her. If you're still as good as our Sarah says you used to be, you'll have her eaten out of your hand. But I am a knight of the Round Table, he protested weakly. I am a protector of the realm, a slayer of evil. I defeat all those who raise their swords in opposition to Arthur, king of all Britain. Trust me, kid, women prefer a man who can cook. Very well then. Broad shoulders squared, Sir Gareth laid both hands against the edge of the table and, with a mighty heave, pushed back his chair. A martial light gleaming amidst the brilliant blue of his eyes, he surged to his feet. There is no dishonor in a flaky pastry.
Thank you, Tanya. All right, Daniela Kelloway is our next reader. Come on up, Daniela.
This is based on true events. The Land of Possibilities. In 1983, the streets of Bratislava were a time capsule, neatly preserved under the weight of communist rule, the air thick with the lingering scent of coal smoke and the tang of factory exhaust. Rows of gray, utilitarian apartment blocks lined the streets, their drab facades barely softened by the occasional flower pot perched on a windowsill. In the bustling squares, markets offered little variety, a few cabbages, some potatoes, the odd string of sausages. But the people shuffled through them with quiet determination, eyes cast downward, and whispers carried on the wind like secrets. Anastasia was just 5 years old. With wide, curious eyes that sparkled like the Danube on a sunny day, her world was small. The cobblestone alleyways of her neighborhood, the towering spires of St. Martin's Cathedral, and the old playground where she and her sister Zuzanna would escape into a world of their own making. They swung on rusted swings, their giggles a tiny rebellion against the backdrop of beige and gray. Their mother, Olga, had a resolve as sturdy as the ancient stone bridges that crossed the river. Olga had whispered to Anastasia about the better place on more than one occasion, always in the safety of their cramped kitchen with the wallpaper peeling in the corners. Anastasia imagined this place as a land of color, a place where the gray washed away to reveal a rainbow of possibilities. On an ordinary Thursday, Olga told the girls they were going on an adventure to Italy, a place Anastasia had only seen in magazines, full of sunshine and smiling faces. Olga spoke in hushed tones about the trip, her eyes darting to the door as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. They boarded a rickety bus, its paint chipped and seats worn thin by years of travel. The bus journey to the border was long, the air inside heavy with anticipation and the low hum of the engine. Outside the window, the Slovak countryside blurred past, a patchwork of fields, each square a different shade of green, a quilt covering the earth. As they crossed each kilometer, their eyes never stopped, a vigilant scan of the horizon. As the bus wound through the winding roads, Olga set the stage for the escape. "It's time," she whispered, and pinched the girl's arm. The pain was sharp and immediate. Anastasia's cries filled the small space like a siren. Olga, seizing the moment, persuaded the driver in a way that only a desperate mother could muster. "Please, she's just a child. She needs air. She needs something from the luggage down below," her voice cracking with sincerity. The driver, a man whose face bore the marks of years of hardship, nodded reluctantly and pulled the bus to a stop by the side of a dusty road. The countryside seemed to hold its breath as Olga, Anastasia, and Zuzanna stepped off the bus. The driver watched them through his rearview mirror, his expression unreadable, as the bus chugged back to life and continued on its path, leaving them standing in the shadow of a thick forest. The unspoken truth between mother and driver. Both knew that they were not getting back on the bus. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the road as they walked. Olga held their hands tightly, her grip firm and reassuring. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth, and Anastasia noticed the vibrant colors around her, the deep greens of the forest, the gold of the setting sun, the blue of the sky. They trekked closer to the Austrian border. Their pace quickened, driven by a mixture of fear and hope. They hitched a ride with a farmer who spoke little but offered them a place in the back of his truck among crates of vegetables. Anastasia nestled between her sister and the cool metal of the truck, her heart thudding like a drum in her chest. When they arrived at the Austrian border, the world seemed to open up before them. Olga's eyes filled with tears of relief as she had held her daughters close. The camp in Austria was a place of transition, a waiting room for dreams yet to be realized. Here, the air was filled with the mingling languages of countless other refugees, each with their own story of escape and survival. Anastasia and Susanna played with children from all across the Eastern Bloc, their games a universal language that transcended borders and politics. The sisters became explorers of their new world, their imaginations running wild amid the uncertainty. One evening, Olga told them of the next step in their journey, a land called Canada, a place even further away than their dreams had ever dared to wander. Anastasia could see the brighter future painted in her mother's eyes. Would it be the land of possibilities?
Daniela, thank you. Daniela, thank you. And now, please welcome to the podium Sol Korngold.
This is something that I wrote about 8 years ago. It's called Abba. His most comfortable position was with his right wrist behind his head on the pillow. I know that because it's mine too. My right ankle over my left with a pillow under the knees. That's how I remember him, in that exact position on his bed in the flat on Jabotinsky by the Kikara Medina. The sharpness of the elbow, the ankle, and the foot, the shape of his skull, all the clearest indications of his deteriorating condition. His smile, his laugh, the way his hand would hang off the wrist, though, were pure Uri. The honking of horns almost never stops on Jabotinsky, but it doesn't seem to bother me when I'm there as much as it might back home. We stopped for coffee on Borekas, the three of us, on our way to see Dad that morning. Guy had his list of things we needed to do on that yellow line paper, and Galit, too, was full of purpose. It's a rare thing, the three of us together, and I loved us that week. We had rented a little apartment with a balcony on Dizengoff, and I was getting up really early every morning to go for a bit of a run and bring back coffees. There's nothing better than Tel Aviv as the city is just waking. Hardly anyone out except for the shopkeepers cleaning their sidewalks and setting up before the heat of the day fully sets in. I'd put on my iPod and head out on the same route, south along Dizengoff toward the Kikar, then west past the cinema toward Lalu and Papi's old place on Chobevei Tzion, and then down Brugershaw Street to the beach. And on my way back, I take Allenby to Gordon and head back up toward Dizengoff for the coffees. The fine terracotta sand on the sidewalks and the smell of cat piss is something unique to this part of the world, maybe even this city. I can't remember all the tunes on my playlist, but the opening bars of I'm Scared by Burton Cummings can transport me back to that place and time in an instant. Dad lying on his bed, the olive green sheets. The windowsill and side table were littered with his pills, and inside the drawer, just as it was when we all lived under the same roof, that weird fake leather octagonal case with the flap compartments that held his engineer's ring, his gold Omega watch, a tangle of gold chains, and our baby teeth. His mouth and smile were the same as they had always been, but his face and body were so changed. I knew he was sick, really sick, but I had never expected to see him like this. I was shocked and actually pissed that we hadn't really been told of his condition. His hair was cut super short, all white, his skin so taut on his face without an ounce of fat anywhere. He must have weighed 110 pounds, if that. His ears seemed a size or two too big, and his eyes floated loosely with greater relief from their sockets. A more defined version of himself. I didn't know how much pain he was in until we met Daphne. He did everything he could to hide it from us. And even though he hated the doting, he was so happy to see us walk through that door every day. He let us have that. The day before, we took a taxi from the Kupat Cholim with supplies for the flat. Cab drivers in Israel, with little exception, are like your favorite uncle. After dispensing with where we needed to go, we'd get right into it. From darting eyes in the rearview mirror. Atem achim? Taumim? Are you brothers? Twins? Ah, Canada, yafeh. Then, me'efa ivrit shelachem? Where's your Hebrew from? Mom and Dad both grew up in Tel Aviv. They met on the beach just down the street. And then he'd ask, it was almost always a he, why we're visiting, and we'd get the knowing, sympathetic nod, and even once, I think, a tear. Baruch Hashem shebatem, atem yeladim tovim. Thank God you came. You're good kids. After dinner the following night, we got a frantic call from Wendy. We'd said goodbye just a couple hours before when she called. We rushed back to the apartment to find Dad on the floor of the bathroom, soiled and writhing in pain. Guy, bless his soul, managed to get Dad cleaned up and back in the bed. I often think back on that time and wish I had the strength and fortitude to have been more present, there for Dad the way Guy was. Those 10 or so days with Dad seemed to pass by in a flash. I was naive to think that I'd see him again, or maybe that was the easiest way to say goodbye. There he was, so proud of each of us, thanking us for having come to see him, for having been so helpful. I was sitting on the front porch at a shiva on Euclid about a week later when I got the call that Dad had passed. I took a deep breath, looked up at the sky, and left without saying a word. I was relieved when the rabbi asked Guy to go with him to a small outbuilding off the main path of the cemetery to identify the body. I couldn't do it, and I know it's something that will stay with Guy forever. Burying the dead in Israel is a rudimentary and primal exercise. No coffins, no machines to gently lower the body, just a simple white sheet wrapped around the body in a grave that seemed too shallow. As his sons, Guy and I were told to place Dad in the grave. I hadn't expected this. Dad was wrapped in the sheet on a chrome gurney with fat air-pumped tires waiting under the dappled shade of a nearby olive tree. I had the ankles and Guy the head. And through a curtain of tears, we laid him down as gently as we could. I'll never forget the feeling of his ankles in my hands. Dad was an engineer and a celebrated mathematician who appreciated and excelled at logic. He was not a religious man, but a pragmatist who preferred the scientific to the spiritual. I inherited this view until about 3 days after returning to Toronto. Dad came to me in the middle of the night, stood at the end of my bed for what felt like 15 minutes without saying a word. He let me know that he was fine and that I'd be fine too. And he wasn't skeletal anymore, but full of color, the best version of himself. He looked down at me with that smile, the same one that I remember as a kid, the same one that I see in Galit when she smiles, and the same that I had seen just a few weeks before on that bed with the green sheets. So long, Abba. I love you.
So, thank you. We have an open mic slot now for Suzanne. Here she comes. Oh, that's not Suzanne. Hello. There's Suzanne. Hello, Suzanne.
Thank you. Is this the right height?
I think so.
Yes.
Does that work? Thank you very much for having me. I'm very delighted to be here for the opportunity. This piece is called Measures. I visit my father in hospital every Saturday. It's not a real hospital. It's a step-down unit, a retirement home repurposed to ease the burden of bodies competing for limited hospital bed space. The patients here patiently await death, or they wait to pass a test called Activities of Daily Living, so they might score a return to former lives. It's all about patient-to-nurse ratios and patient proximity to death, just math. The room my father is in, 316, is a small one. One-bedroom apartment designed to shelter a couple who really get along,
or a solo senior citizen. Now it holds 3 aged men in 3 hospital beds and no chairs to sit on when visiting. A man named Victor has the bedroom. He is tiny and more yellow each time I visit. He is skeletal, though his stomach balloons from his body. His belly button is definitely an outie. It probably wasn't always. My father smiles, caged in his hospital bed, a welcome. As a kid, his smile was a peculiar twisting of his lips, holding like a cup cruelty and condescension about to spill forth. We distanced ourselves from the inevitable poison, his words arrowing the air to the gut. We learned to excuse his smile. He, a refugee after all, a Canadian through revolution. His 13-year-old body a witness to other bodies strung up along the boulevards of the old city, tanks rolling in, Molotov cocktails and body parts made kites. His smile, back then, did not seem a part of him as it does now. Still, conversations and effort raised beneath such rain, beneath an umbrella of pain. In room 316 of this Knott hospital, a glass door opens to a fake balcony. From there, looking down on the statue of Jesus, I feel benevolence drain. I can only look out the window if the man my father calls lump of lard isn't in the hospital bed beside it. A prosthetic leg furnishes the corner beneath a TV screen angled from the wall. My father's railed bed is in the kitchenette. If he wants a glass of water, he rolls to his right. Blue fabric curtains suspend from railings mounted to the ceiling. The fabric separates everything. Lump of lard from my father's radio tuned too loudly to the opera station, the angles of sunlight from reaching my father's bed, the sorrows and longings of 3 different men. Every week I visit, there is less and less of Victor. His yellow skin droops from the sticks of his bones. His brown pupils bulge from sunken sockets, shadowing his forehead. He often cries out in pain. "I know, Vic, we're here, we hear you," my dad says, explaining it's important to cheer him on. Vic is proud. He was given 4 months to live, and that was 7 months ago. In my mind, I wrestle with Victor's decision to forego MAID, medical assistance in dying. His yellow death is inevitable. Why wait? Today, when I exit the stairwell and enter the 3rd floor, Vic sits in a wheelchair in the center of the hallway. There is so little of his body. He seems only a distended stomach with a yellow head thrown back and a mouth agape at the ceiling. I'm frightened he's dead. Closer inspection reveals his yolk-colored birdcage chest expands and contracts around a fluttering heart. Today, my father's welcome smile from behind the rails. Today, the opera is La Traviata, conducted by Toscanini. An orderly wheels Vic past into the bedroom. Eventually, Vic shuffles by me to the microwave. "Is that your sister's soup?" my father asks him. It is. While it heats, my father and Vic argue over the green leaves in the soup. Vic calls it by its Portuguese name. My father insists it's kale. Toscanini chimes in. I imagine the maple keys on the trees outside shiver, whisper, and lean against a kitchen cabinet, not interjecting. I understand, now, it's joy arguing a position. Vic lifts the bowl of soup from the microwave, then raises it to his face, closes his eyes to concentrate, inhaling the steam, the spice swirls of Portuguese sausage. I hear his eyelids when they snap open. A light dances in his eyes. He raises the bowl, wafts the steam towards my face. Its gloriousness travels from the tips of his yellow fingers to grace my nostrils. I smell chicken stock and chilies, the green of leaves, the orange of coriander seeds. I think anyone would give a life to taste such cooked-in love. Suddenly, I understand not only the pleasure of choice, but how infinity might be measured. I pull the blue curtain to the wall. Sun splashes in. My father is up and walking with the aid of a walker. His test score improves. I reconsider MAID, its balance. I instruct my father to stand by the window. The fake balcony door opens easily. Sunlit wind rushes in. Below, seed keys on a maple tree twirl the gray twiggy ends of all its branches. It sparkles, it winks, alive. So beautiful it can only be a miracle. Sweet air of outside too, Toscanini's violins. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Now I'd please welcome Paulette Rothbauer.
This story doesn't really begin with a boy named Luke who died in a house fire the evening of February 14, 1977. But all these years later, I do often have him in my thoughts, my forever Valentine after all. My grade 4 teacher, Miss Rademacher, had insisted that her pupils, a crowd of mostly working class kids, participate in what she called a box social for Valentine's Day. The girls needed to bring a decorated box filled with lunch to share with the boys. The boys got to choose a box and a girl. If Miss Rademacher had stopped to consider her motives, perhaps the whole idea would have betrayed a longing of her own heart. We didn't really have any usable boxes at home. Shoe boxes were a rarity anyway because my mother bought her shoes loose from a bin at Siegel's. The day before the box social, I eyed my younger brother's green metal toolbox. Our father had made it for him. It had a hinged lid with a silver handle in the center and a clasp that locked on the front. My mom helped me decorate the toolbox with red tissue paper and purple construction paper hearts. We made sandwiches with rye bread, what we called real butter, the unsalted kind, and salami. I added dill pickles and 2 pieces of the honey cake we called Entbijcook. No cinnamon hearts, no chocolate, and no question that I coveted that toolbox. On Valentine's Day, I wore my prize new for me birthday Western shirt with pearlized snaps and my old cowhide vest with fringes. If my mother had let me, I would have proudly swaggered to school with my plastic hip belt too, loaded with cap guns and strips, toolbox in hand. When I arrived at school, it didn't take long for the taunting to start. Hey, Poulet, nice tackle box, bet you got some good bait in there. Did you forget that you had to decorate a shoebox? What is that? I don't get that. Is that a toolbox? Your box looks ugly. Your box looks stupid. A table had been moved to the front of the room beside Miss Rademacher's desk, beneath the blackboard. It was draped with a white tablecloth that also had paper hearts and cupids taped to it. So all morning, the boxes stole my attention as I assessed the details of each. How Judy's box matched her dress, how Angela decorated the bottom and top of her box so that you could lift the lid right off. At lunch, Luke got to choose first, like always, because he was A for Atler, and Miss Rademacher always started with the A's. Luke had the same clothes on as last week. His hair was greasy, his nose was running like always. Everyone said that Luke had the cooties. I squeezed my eyes shut and prayed hard in my head, please God, don't let Luke pick me. Please God, please. Luke half ran, half walked to the table, grabbed the toolbox, and cradled it in his arms as he returned to his desk. He sat down with a smile, his eyes bright. For a minute, I thought things might be okay. But then Trent called out, fish lips, meat lunch bait, followed by laughter. Luke shoved the card to my side of the desk as I sat down beside him, both making sure that not one part of me touched him. I was keen on the card. Will you be my Valentine? Asked the brown and white, long-eared, big-eyed puppy on the front. The card was a bit battered, but still cute. I turned it over, I closed my eyes and tried not to move a single muscle in my face. Dear Carol, love Dan, it read. I could see that someone had tried to rub it out. Miss Rademacher called out with a clap of her hands, Happy Valentine's, boys and girls. I looked at Luke through my bangs and whispered, Thanks for the card. Luke, avoiding my eyes, wiped his hands on his thighs, sniffed once, quietly, and asked, Do I open the box or do you? With sudden disgust, I pulled the box over to my side and unlatched the lid. I pulled out 2 pieces of honey cake, 2 sandwiches, all individually wrapped in waxed paper packages. I loved these tidy packages, the paper firmly folded together and then tucked underneath. There was another package, wet where the dill pickle juice had leaked out from the folds of paper. I hated salami, and so gave Luke both sandwiches and kept all the Oint by Cook and dill pickles for myself. As Luke unwrapped and ate the sandwiches, his eyes never strayed from the front of the room. I could hear him chewing and swallowing and then biting and chewing and swallowing again. There was the smell of salami. I looked at him and the words just came out of my mouth. I hate you. You were so gross. His eyes widened and he swallowed hard, but it was like he hadn't heard me. Then his right leg started jigging like mad. It is hard to eat a pickle without crunching, and I tried not to move at all. I was so focused on my own misery that before I knew what was happening, Luke got up and took the toolbox with him. I was stunned. He couldn't keep it. I looked around for help and considered asking Miss Rademacher, but abandoned that idea when I saw her pinning Valentine's Day cards to the bulletin board. About a week after the house fire, I visited the cordoned-off lot. The remaining parts of the house were open to the world, and Luke's family had disappeared as if they had never been there, never made friends, or had jobs, or went to school. When I saw the toolbox poking up out of the snow, I stopped in my tracks. How had it ended up outside? Had Luke discarded it on his way into the house that afternoon when he returned home from school? Or did he toss it out the window during the fire? Every year, I imagine Luke that night, his legs hanging over the edge of the high second-floor window, seconds before he pushes off into the dark winter morning air, this time not falling, but flying.
Thank you, Paulette. Now let's please welcome Charlotte Henay.
Yeah, I think that's good. Thank you. I'm going to read you a mashup of excerpts from an unpublished manuscript called All the Bones. So I'm going to offer you a little bit of a preamble first. It's a cacophony of voices, so if you struggle to distinguish who is who, that's intentional. And it's also a collective process, so if you feel any kind of urge to vocalize, to say, no, yes, please do any of those. This piece is about one of the times where a complete stranger who you seem to encounter by accident says or does something or looks away that you just know means someone has stepped into them for that brief moment and to speak with you, especially when grief has you in that portal that's the in-between as one of death's gifts. I call it, I write my dreams and they ask me questions. The hibiscus in this place don't recognize me. They are yellow, the color of periwinkles, sour, medicinal, in between. They aren't red, painted by sister, auntie, stranger, like the ones I grow out of nostalgia, bright, hot, familiar. The hibiscus in this place don't welcome me. They're healthy. Someone waters them sparingly, picks up fallen buds the day after. They aren't yours. I have a bruise I don't recognize, and she says the dead pinch you in their sleep. Do they pinch you to send your spirit back to your body or to remind you they are there? Wait, you need a sponsor. Bring your cousin. You are an initiate. Many women in families of love and vengeance have claimed you. In your dreaming visions of charms and armies come calling. Tongue like a scythe. Day 4, I never want to be anywhere else except their eyes wash momentarily across my person, and this is the way I have thought to be honest. Only in waking you can't remember them or yourself. They've recently taken to other modes of communication, and her cheeks sparkle in the gallery light. Do you hear them? You are a seed. That woman had a seeing, and you were tethered, a multitude of cords, restrained, I heard her say. You're a reawakening to cold spots and intercontinental telepathic recognition. I am vigilant at night, once by habit and now practice. Bending time is my gift. Early morning sees me vulnerable to misapprehension, and on my way there, the man on the street sits with everything that's his, maybe some extra borrowed pieces, and a passerby makes an offering of coins. And I remember I'm supposed to greet everyone as though I am human, present. So I good morning, alongside my disclaimer, bleeding into silence. She must have thought she could hide in someone else's skin. And he says he doesn't want my change, he wants to comb my hair. What have I asked of you but everything? And this gives me pause. Supplicant, you have already tithed. Pick some neem, burn me a candle. Each time you have called, I have heard you. And you are unsure whether someone without moorings can reduce you so carelessly and consume you. Refusing accumulation in an intimate gesture. Could it be both? And when the day rubs up against you, we know what it means to come alive sporadically. I don't know. Inclined to be someone you're not, and the problem is you can't always be sure who you are. So I tell him, I never comb it. But you must pick it, he says. Socially awkward, making discomfort wherever I go. That way they don't know I struggle to stay present in every moment. I concede that much. For hours, he says, and motions with the carving fork in his right hand. Languid, pulling out from underneath at the nape. And he says, or maybe he said, shiny brown skin. Soft, soft, so soft. I laugh nervously. Yes, it's really curly there. And it seems genuine, my laugh. And surprised at this middle-aged white man living over a grate. How does he know this? I wish him good day, and I leave, feeling the breakfast grease turn over in my stomach, pinned between my assumptions and having perhaps participated in my own excoriation. Grammy, why are you so stupid? Does he have a daughter? An auntie, a partner, a fetish? Or maybe he was someone else. And you wonder, can they coexist between being able to leave and getting left?
Charlotte, thank you. And finally, our last reader for the day, please welcome Kathryn Kuitenbrouwer.
Hi everyone. This is fun. I'm going to read from, well, first of all, I just want to say it's like really hard to make any sense of reading from, like, for 5 minutes from a novel.
So I need to give a tiny little bit of context, but not that much. So it still probably won't make a lot of sense in terms of like how it might work in terms of plot or anything like that. The novel that I'm reading from is Wait Softly, Brother, and it's about a woman who leaves a marriage and in desperately trying to chase the tail of a really important story, she ends up writing a completely different one about the American Civil War. We'd been fighting back to back, moving forward incrementally. That was the point, wasn't it? To gain ground in this awful place. Belair got up and left me alone then. I gazed upon the viscera of a victim to my left. There would be maggots soon enough, but for now it was alarming, glistening, entrails, pink and creature-like up against the rough fabric of the uniform. I could make no sense of it in the pretty landscape. Why was I here? Soil kicked up near me, and there was Belair, his straggle mustache curling into his mouth, sweat and dirt bathing his face. Boyd, he said, you've got to move, boy. I was afraid, not the regular sort that made me sometimes say stupid things or hold back, but full body terror. I have the trots, I said. No, Belair said, and crouched beside me. You do not. I leaned back into the rebel corpse. I gestured at the acres of death, the landscape dotted with crumpled blue and gray uniforms, the splash of red, both cloth and fluid. How do you do this? I said, and then I squinted and drew a spiral from out in, from one dead thing to the next. We both knew we would be digging in the morning if we lived. Belair's eyes softened. He placed his palm on my chest. When he touched me, I felt the locket of Henry Mulden, the heart shape of it emboss my skin. You just have to stop caring, he said. Is there not some iota of hatred in you? Nurture it and let it thrive. I shook through my whole self. I wouldn't cry again, I told myself, but even so I could feel my chest convulsing against this admonition. The booming demand of father then saying, boy, to me that last dinner before I left. His great haired fist slamming down on the oaken table. You make me thoroughly sick, he bellowed, and then quietly resumed chewing his roast and salting his potatoes while making gentle conversation with mother. My father's disgust was self-pity, which seemed worse. I would not have dared to hit him. I looked back up at Belair's expectant face, my mouth surely contorted against all that was gathering in me. What an enormous resource of anger one needed to hold the tears back. The regimental band sounded faintly to the north, a rallying patriot's song of fife. I tried to let it feed this hatred that Belair had only had to hint at for it to appear. Some beguilement it was. I got up, leaned into some future death. That's it, lad, said Belair, slapping my shoulder. Let us push on. The line was already dozens of yards away, pulsing forward. From the distance I watched men kill, and fall, killing. A theater complete with music. There were children and women watching from across the river, taking tea. There was a photographer preparing his equipment to document the aftermath. No cowards here, Belair said, and smiled at me. I imagined the hard nugget of newfound rage I was supposed to be, to fight like a tiger. The image was handy, I supposed, but also full of menace. I plunged forward with Belair, feeling my malice from the revolt I felt as we skirted the countless dead. How angry were the dead? I wondered senselessly. Around me the wounded whispered and muttered, save me, leave me, push on, a ghost babble saturating me. My rage was now so acute I wanted to inflict it from my own hands just to get it off me, right off me, God damn it. The dying men's evil thoughts were whispering right into my skull. There, Sir Boyd, said Belair, laughing as I sent a bullet straight through a massive enemy farmer. Boyd's back in the land of the living, he said, and he was right. I finished the pimpled boy with a thrust and twist of my bayonet. In camp that night, exhausted, some remorse came to me, a viscous shroud of it. How devilish a thing courage is. I confided to Belair. Belair looked at me queerly. The impression of my father's loathing for me is enough to see me kill a dozen or more, yet my father and his hatred live on. That is crazed thinking, Boyd. I looked up from under my cap. Maybe I'm crazed then, I said, and left it there. I would like to know if a man could make himself mad by seeing through a falseness. I witnessed in myself a yawning chasm between thought and action. It was a great mouth waiting to swallow me up. I could feel its abrasive, mechanical tongue licking me at my edges. I was part of this war. No, not in it, but it. You just need sleep, said Belair. Okay, I said, but still I could feel the bad thing churning toward me. Thank you.
Kathryn, thank you. That is everything. Thank you everyone for coming. Please visit the book table. And readers, writers, thank you so much for a really, really rich afternoon. I don't know where I am. Thank you.